So it's Dan McQuillan.
So, actually, you can't really see the penis on that bridge, right? Or you can. There's a penis on that bridge, and it's a bridge in Moscow, and it was done by a bunch called Voyina, and they're kind of Russian art activists. So there's a bunch of artists who are definitely trying to make an impact and make a change in their society. Can I use this thing? How do I do that? Great, awesomeness. Okay, so obviously, the state actually has long recognized that art can make an impact, and as we kind of know now in some more detail, the CIA were actually funding exhibitions by the abstract expressionists, including Jackson Pollock, because they believed it was an important part of the cultural front against Soviet realism, actually. So art does have an impact, clearly, and even the state recognizes that. But I just wanted to talk for a moment about, well, what I want to get onto is really more concrete change and art. Not just change on a semantic narrative cultural level, but like real stuff of the kind of things that both Carrie and Tessie have already talked about. But before I talk about concrete and real things, I just wanted to get really abstract and talk about Deleuze and Guattari and their ideas around striation. And I'm saying this because I don't want to decry in any way orthodox power, relationships for you guys in terms of having an influence with strategic decision-making bodies and all that kind of thing. Okay? I just want to present a power. Is really pa. If I say pa a lot, pa. Okay, so I'm going to have to find optimum distance with this thing. I want to talk about Deleuze and Guattari because they have some very strong ideas that I think are very relevant, not just to the situation of artists, but in general to the broader changes that are happening in society right now. And the particular one I want to talk about is striation, right? This idea of striation, which they nicked from geology, right? Which is basically a space marked by linear boundaries where you're restricted to a particular plane of activity in the space of all possible potentials. Typical D&G, right? What they're basically saying is, that's how stuff works, right? Institutions and society, particularly institutions, right? You can't really do much. You try and make a change, you get stuck by all sorts of limitations, not just practical and legal ones, but cultural and conceptual and so on. You guys are familiar with this stuff, right? You're artists, okay? But this is the problem, right? This is the orthodox structure of society, right? Now, what's interesting at the moment is, I think that there are lots more affordances, right, potentials, openings for dodging this stuff and still having an impact, still having some influence. Okay, so for me, that's mostly been through digital, and so that's what I'm going to bang on about, mainly through the internet, right? Me and a couple of other guys were stuck in straighted institutions and said, you know, this isn't really doing it. We've got to make something else, something a bit more like what D&G would have called a smooth space, you know, zones of intensity flows, all that kind of stuff. Basically, making stuff happen because we knew that the digital technology and its connection to the internet was opening up these affordances, these new possibilities for making a difference very quickly, right? Very quickly. So we set up a thing called Social Innovation Camp, which people submit ideas and we build prototypes over a weekend. That's pretty much it. It's not a secret recipe. There's no secret sauce. I thought long and hard why it works, and I think there are some particular characteristics that are relevant to sort of to explicate in a way, and they are things that are is asset-based, very much along the lines of what Carrie was talking about, right? The projects in Social Innovation Camp, they don't go like, oh, we need more of that, and we need to complain to somebody because there isn't enough of that. Okay, we look at what we've got, what we can aggregate, and what we can do with that. And of course, we look at the potential of digital to bring that stuff together and to build the action on top of. It's asset-based, it's interdisciplinary, as academics love to say, just basically brings very different kind of people together. And I think that's really key. You know, whatever you want to do, artists alone aren't going to make it happen. Artists with other people, on the other hand, very powerful combination. Okay? It's interdisciplinary, it's peer-to-peer, nobody has any more expertise than anybody else. The geeks in the room don't have any more say on what gets built technology-wise than the non-geeks, or vice versa. Right? The geeks have a say in the social side of things, and so on and so forth. So it's a P2P, which I'll come back to peer-to-peer, and it's rapid prototyping. Okay, that's the most excellent thing about the current situation for me, is you can make stuff happen, the kind of prototypes that Carrie's talking about, you can make stuff happen in less time than it takes to fill in a funding bid. I don't know if the word, yeah? No, the funding bid sort of raises the hackles on the back of your neck, but, or brings a sort of sad face, but, you know, funding bids, sad face. Prototypes, happy face. In fact, yeah, and actually I think it's quite a fundamental thing that's going on at the moment that institutions as we know them are really struggling with, is that they love policy. Policy is a kind of activity that suits institutions. And prototyping, I would say, is the new policy. Right? Prototyping is doing stuff and exploring in reality what the consequences are, rather than policy, which is largely an activity based around deferment, I would propose. I'm not really offending anybody, but just some ideas. Where are we? Completely lost already. So that's the kind of projects that we've done, enabled by design, the Good Gym, MyPolice. These are projects that have continued to be social businesses, small ones, but influential. But the interesting thing is that they've actually continued. They're things that came, as an idea on the back of an envelope, got prototyped, and have continued to grow and change. Mainly, I think, because projects like SciCamp, and it's not the only one, there's plenty of other similar and yet different initiatives out there, right? They create this mood of engagement, for one thing, and they create a sense of agency, because you don't have to ask permission to do this stuff. Right? You don't have to ask permission of senior management, you don't have to ask permission even of the institutions. We set up MyPolice without asking the police. Okay? Granted, the Home Office did then try and squash it, but they didn't succeed because of the kind of community resistance that Carrie was talking about. People said, no, that's a good idea. Let it be, let it happen. Okay, so that's Social Innovation Camp as one particular brand or flavour of a kind of project that tries to capitalise on what I'm trying to lay out as the broader characteristics of the possibilities for change and influence right now. And, well, that's actually in Kyrgyzstan, but anyway. What I want to get to really is the broader ideas behind it, which I would call hacking, which you're probably very familiar with, I imagine. I mean, hacking was originally back in the 80s, 90s. I was looking back at some cheesy film posters. Cracking was originally, in the popular mind, connected with what is really cracking, which is illegal breaking into stuff. So I want to just lay out for a second what hacking really is, okay, as if anybody could say. Okay, it certainly was originally defined as exploring the details of programmable systems. And it still is. That is a form of hacking. But it was also originally, by hackers themselves, in the jargon file, defined as one who enjoys the intellectual challenge of creatively overcoming or circumventing limitations. Nothing about programming, right? Okay, or, what's this now? Transforming pre-existing elements to evoke meanings not originally intended in the raw material of the hack. Hence the iPad skateboard, probably the highest goal that any iPad can aim for, in my opinion. So it's really taking stuff and it's like circuit bending. It's messing with stuff creatively, overcoming barriers, conceptually as well. Hacking is a state of mind. Here's an example of a social hack that doesn't work against existing institutions, but does overcome some of their limitations. This was in Haiti, and this was a response. This was the kind of response mechanism. Actually centered around a mobile phone shortcode to some of the situation in Haiti. And I think it's really interesting as an example of another theoretical thing related to DNG, of an assemblage. But it's basically a bunch of stuff stitched together in an unexpected way to reveal affordances and potentialities that weren't there originally. You've got some really heavy institutions here, US Coast Guard, US Southern Command, and Red Cross, all of whom almost uniquely bad at capitalizing on the potential of sort of rapid prototyping and community activity. And what you've got stitching these things together are projects like Ushahidi. Crowdflower is an outsourcing project, but they sort of bent their own processes to make themselves into a rapid text message translation, real-time translation service with volunteers. And Person Finder was originally a volunteer project, although it became absorbed into the greater body of Google eventually. But what happened was what it was actually people who worked in a lot of those institutions coming out and saying, look, it's not going to happen. We're never going to get this sorted out through management, dare I say. We have to go outside, organize ourselves, and create the tools that will stitch this together. So that's kind of very real, concrete world, concrete need situation, and that's both technical and conceptual hacking. And now that I'm teaching, I'm in academia, unbelievably, I've discovered how lacking that is. And so that's what we're trying to embody in stuff like this. This is the MA, one of the MAs we're currently doing. And it's really interesting for me how it is not there's not an automatic appreciation of this kind of idea of hacking. And so it's quite an effort to try and communicate. And yet, it's popping out all over the place. Right? That's what I want to really say to you guys. There's parallel structures of influence, not necessarily just around prototyping small social innovations, which are great, okay, but looking at the wider context which you're operating in, and particularly around the idea of representation. It's really interesting at the moment, the sort of anti-representational narrative around Occupy, which I think is quite a deep thing. It's an unwillingness to engage with the offering of the system to have conversations on the system's terms. right? In politics, they call it prefigurative politics, right? It's making it happen rather than asking somebody else to make it happen for you, okay? And it's prototyping, actually. There's a lot of people in the world that I spend more time in of digital types who would identify Occupy very clearly as open source rapid prototyping, but on a kind of social level. Okay, so we've got somebody who, okay, so what's really interesting for me when I'm trying to understand this is how do we frame what's going on in broader terms, and I lean a lot on a guy called Paulo Freire, who was a radical pedagogist, person who thought about teaching and learning. And his thing, which is really, I suppose, what I'm inviting you guys to do, was that you learn best, you explore best, just by getting out there and getting stuck in, essentially. That's probably not quite how he put it. Okay, he put it more like, the practice of freedom is the means by which men and women deal critically with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. But I'd call it getting stuck in, really. And this is the other important wing of getting stuck in these days. It's the internet that says, oh, fuck, the internet is here. Right, and this is one of the early manifestations of Anonymous. And I think it's really worth, and I'm putting them up because it's alongside Occupy. These are not sort of separate phenomena at the moment. They're really important expressions of something that I would, at the moment, characterize as almost a sort of broader atmosphere of dissent or hacktivist tendency, really. And this one is the one that's born off the internet. Actually, when I look at Anonymous, I'm not an artist, never have been labelled as an artist. I don't think anyone even called me an artist, except possibly a piss artist. But so, I've never actually been labelled as an artist, but I have hung around with quite a lot of artists and picked up stuff about Luther Blissett and Karen Elliott and things like that. That's what I recall if I think about something like Anonymous. I think this is a similar thing, born of the internet, born of 4chan, born of a sort of bastardized version of Nietzsche, really, coming into play as a political force. And it really is now a political force, right? It was a trolling, pranksters, and is now very much a political force, explicitly, self-consciously, one in which actually evokes, for 2 or 3 very particular reasons, the kind of radicalism that was around in this country in the 1640s, I would say. Obviously, I'd be quite happy to debate that, but it represents a kind of antinomianism, and that's the same with Occupy, and that's the same with what comes out of the digital practice, right? You don't have to even believe in the structures that are there, right? You can just be what you think should be. You can enact, in this case, the commons. And that's the other strand that runs through a lot of this stuff, the commons. And this artistic and aesthetic response is coming into play. I don't know if you ever saw the video, which I don't have time to show, of our beloved pepper spraying cop. But if you never saw the meme of the art response to the pepper spraying cop, check it out, because it's fantastic sort of aesthetic comment on what happened in University of Southern California, wherever it was. Oops. That's just a bit of doxing. I'll explain doxing outside the talk to anyone who's interested. So the other thing I can really connect to when I was thinking about the art movements is the craftivism. What's always kind of interested and intrigues me at the moment is this exploration around sort of knitting and crafts and this sort of handicrafts subversion that's going on. I feel this is similar to the kind of stuff that I'm doing and the kind of broader currents that I identify with, and yet it's not, at the moment, self-consciously the same thing. It does in some ways harken back to the pre-industrial, which is actually, weirdly, I think where Anonymous is going. But it doesn't have that explicit link at the moment. So I wanted to say, if you don't know about hack spaces, do find them. There's probably one near you. And hack spaces are, again, things I would say are born of the digital culture, possibly born of the engineering culture to some extent. But the philosophy and the practice in hack spaces is, I mean, this is a photo taken by somebody else trying to evoke that. They went to a hack space and they found at the same time handicrafts and lots of Linux manuals. It's a kind of space where people have 3D printers and practice geek humor. As you know, that's kind of one of the defining characteristics of all this stuff. So you have to define your position in this. Okay, the commons is one of the defining activities. Peer-to-peer is, I would say, the fundamental characteristic of IRC spaces of Anonymous or the camps of Occupy. And by that, I like the definition of the P2P Foundation. Peer-to-peer is a relational dynamic in which people exchange not with each other as individuals, but with a commons. Okay, and the punchline is on a global scale enabled by internet technologies. Okay, you've got a lot of this stuff going on, and it is mediated by the internet, and of course this is well known, and therefore there are forces afoot to stop that. This is a blatant example in Egypt. They actually shut it down. Oops. That was unintended, but rather wonderful, if only the lights had gone off at the same moment. But, sorry, have I? Yeah, this is the last slide. Yeah, and so I apologize for the time. But this is the other one I just want to say to you guys, because this is at the moment, the internet, I would say, is the nervous system or whatever of a lot of what I would see, the positive social developments that I try to describe, and it is under severe attack, and sometimes in your name, actually, in the name of creatives. Not really, of course, in the interest of great mega monopolies and international status, but in your name, in the name of creators and producers, the internet is under attack at absolutely fundamental DNA level, right? And it's happening right now, so please get stuck in and try and stop that. Thanks very much.